another of the American Museum of Tort Law's continuing video series of interesting talks with interesting people on various law-related topics. I'm your host, Rick Newman, Executive Director of the American Museum of Tort Law. Our guest today is Carrie Goldberg, who is an attorney, an author, and a nationally known advocate for victims of domestic violence and online harassment, cybersexual exploitation, and revenge porn. Carrie, welcome. It's a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you, Rick. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, so let's start with terminology. What is cybersexual exploitation? What is revenge porn?
Sure. Well, so cybersexual exploitation is kind of a blanketing term for the kinds of sexual privacy invasions and harassments that we see on the internet. So it can cover anything from somebody's nude or sexual images being uploaded without consent to kids being blackmailed for nude images by predators that they've met on social media sites, to just kind of more standard child pornography or child sexual abuse material. Revenge porn is the non-consensual distribution of intimate images, which, there's, at this point, as of yesterday, there are 48 state laws that criminalize the non-consensual distribution of intimate images. Some of them require that there be this intent to harass or harm, so that it, almost is kind of literally a revenge porn bill or statute where there is that kind of revenge motivation. But in practice, what we actually see tons of is kind of we just see a big variety of motives. Some people upload material because they feel like they're acting in the public interest as journalists. Other people, do it to humiliate. Some web providers do it for the money. It's not always literally about revenge.
And talk about the harm that this can cause to people whose images are used non-consensually without their permission.
Yeah, so a number of years ago, CCRI, the nonprofit that kind of leads the way when it comes to non-consensual pornography, they did a study and found that I think like 80 or 90% of people whose images were shared without consent, and by images I mean sexually graphic pictures and videos, that like almost all of them experienced some sort of extreme emotional distress. Back in like 2014, when I first started my firm, it was still accepted on our big social media platforms like Facebook and Google, for Twitter, for revenge porn to be up. And so what we saw was that victims whose pictures and videos were up then had to deal with their Google results. And if their name was typed into Google, then it would lead to all these revenge porn websites with links. And so that then impacted all their prospects. Nobody gets hired, goes on a date, accepts a new roommate without a Google search. And also, the images often go viral, especially if they're on a website. Usually, statistically, the victim's name and contact information is usually posted with the images. And so the harm was really in many aspects of our client's life and impacted everything. In 2014, 2015, it wasn't accepted that it was criminal. There were only 3 states that had criminal laws, and much more of the onus was on the victims. Why did you take that naked picture in the first place? And victim blaming. And it was sort of this idea that victims who express their intimacy with a trusted partner by sharing nude images were somehow abnormal, sexual deviance or something. And we've come a long way, I think, especially, the era of the pandemic where we literally are doing everything remotely. We've come a long way in terms of normalizing the sharing of the consensual sharing of nude images, and recognizing that that's pretty normal behavior. What's not normal is then, for the recipient to share them or post them without the sender's consent.
Yeah, well, because it seems like it's a far cry if two people in a relationship exchange nude photos of each other. That isn't the same as saying, now you can publish those photos all around the world and I won't have any say in it. That's clearly the jump that's being made without permission, without consent, without authorization. So what about?
Yeah, and
go on. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and I think it comes down to really what's the expectation of privacy when you're sharing them in the context of a intimate relationship. There is an expectation that that image is being shared with that one person and not globally with the whole internet.
And how does that come about? What about these websites or whatever it is that disseminate these pictures? Don't they have some responsibility in this whole mix?
I think they have moral responsibility. They would argue that they don't have any legal responsibility, and that they are protected because of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which says, as long as the content is uploaded by users, then the platform is not liable. We have in the last 7 years made a lot of progress in terms of getting rid of the dedicated revenge porn platforms. There were a lot, and My Ex, Anybody Up, and those were all shut down for different reasons, and none of them had to do with the actual, voluminous amount of non-consensually shared images. But in one case, there was a kind of extortive kind of buyback where victims could only get their images off if they paid a bunch of money. In another case, there was hacking and identity theft by the people who ran the website, and they were like hacking into people's account to get the material that they then uploaded. And then in a third site, there was underage victims, and they were shut down because of that. But it's interesting that none of them were shut down because of the actual majority of the content that was being shared.
And you were involved in the Herrick v. Grindr case, I think it was. Tell us a little bit about that, not only the human toll, but how it played out in court.
Sure. So we were just talking about Section 230, and that was sort of the operative law in our case against Grindr. So what happened was that our client, Matthew Herrick, who was a New York City resident, 33 years old, a waiter / model, had just ended a controlling and abusive relationship. And one of the ways that his abuser retaliated by Matthew breaking up was to start impersonating Matthew on Grindr. And so his ex would create all these Grindr profiles with Matthew's picture and intimate information about Matthew. And then he would talk to other Grindr users and make dates for Matthew. And he would use Grindr's geolocating technology and their little pinpointing mapping function. And he would send people literally to Matthew's home and to his job. And I'm not talking about once or twice, Rick. I'm talking about over 1,200 strangers came to Matthew's workplace and to his job. I mean, and over a period of less than a year, there were some days when as many as 23 people came, and they all were believing that they had, a consensual sex date with Matthew. Many of them were told that Matthew had rape fantasies and were told, hey, if I tell you to leave, that's just part of the game. And be sure to come back, or please wait for me in the stairwell. They would follow him into the bathroom at work because that was what they were, that was the part of the sex date they thought that they were being invited into. They would be, Matthew couldn't even walk his dog without confronting like people in his home or in his apartment building. He ended up having to put signs on the buzzer saying, if you're here for a sex date via Grindr, I'm not interested. And then his ex started saying, like, don't pay any attention to the signs on the buzzer. So it was really invasive, and it was not anything that it wasn't cyber stalking or an internet crime. This was something that was facilitated through an interactive computer servers, but it wasn't like but it was real life people coming.
Right.
And so Matthew did what most people with harassers do, and he got an order of protection, and he reported this conduct to the police 10 times, and it still continued. And he flagged the profiles over and over again for Grindr. He did everything he could to try to get their attention and try to get them to ban this user, and nothing was working. The guy was also impersonating him on 2 other gay dating apps, and both of those companies were very responsive, much smaller companies than Grindr. So Matthew retained my firm, and we ran to the court to get an injunction against Grindr that would require that they ban that user. Grindr, when they eventually showed up, what's that?
They fought that. They didn't just say.
Yeah. So when they eventually came to court, they said that they didn't have the technology to ban a user, and that they didn't have to anyways, because Section 230 said they didn't have to. That this was basically a content moderation decision, and they were free to moderate their content however they wanted to. So that really changed things in terms of like how I was conceptualizing the case. I ran back to my office and I amended the complaint to make it a product liability case, because it's just so foreseeable, Rick, that if you have created a dating app that facilitates in-person hookups, that sometimes it's going to be used by rapists, by predators, by scam artists, by impersonators. It's going to be used for crimes sometimes. And if you've designed a product that doesn't take that into account and doesn't have the ability for the platform to remove a user, and doesn't even have the infrastructure for somebody like Matt to even get anybody's attention, then in our opinion, you've released a defective product into the stream of commerce. It's defectively designed, it's defectively manufactured, it fails to warn consumers that it's dangerous. And so Grindr said, nah, we really are immune from because of Section 230. This was user-generated content, and if not for the stuff that Matthew's ex put into the profiles and stuff, then none of this would have happened. So it's not on us, it's on the ex.
Yeah, but the ex using their technology and their platform to do his harm.
Right, and they were on notice that this was happening, and they didn't and couldn't fix it. And so the judge agreed with Grindr and said, yeah, Grindr did nothing wrong here. They have the ability to moderate their content and users or content, according to this judge, however they want. And so we thought that was a really bad decision. We thought, Section 230 shouldn't be interpreted so broadly that like it basically means that these companies are outside the scope of product liability law.
Right.
It was the first case of its kind to basically be identifying the platform as a product.
Right.
And they fought that characterization. The Second Circuit agreed with the trial court, and so we lost there. We eventually petitioned for the Supreme Court to hear it. They declined to hear it, and so the case is completely over now. But what's interesting is that now there are so many new Section 230 laws that have been, or bills that have been introduced, and there are many hearings. And this Grindr case is often brought up as one of the most extravagant interpretations of Section 230.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it's an interesting theory because on the one hand, I can see arguments about why you want to preserve internet freedom and not make Facebook or Google or whoever responsible for everything that they link to. But having a dedicated service like Grindr, where they're facilitating relationships, which incorporates the potential for abusive relationships, that seems to me to be a different theory altogether. It's a products case. So, well, we'll see how this plays out. And that, I guess, leads toward the sort of conclusion with this whole thing. What do victims or people who have been harmed by this, what recourse do they have? Is there legislation on the horizon? Is 230 going to be repealed? Are there lawsuits? Help us through this thicket.
Well, when it comes to controlling how internet companies' products work, we really don't have recourse. It's really hard to get anybody's attention at these companies when you're suffering a harm. And that's true. I mean, I have clients whose 11-year-old kids, their intimate images are going viral around a social media platform, and the parents don't know who to call, don't have anybody to call, can't find anybody to intervene at these companies. It's a real problem. There are, I think, 4 or 5 different bills circling around Congress to reform Section 230. They all have their pluses and minuses. I don't know. I have days where I think it maybe we'll get some reform, and days where I think it's completely hopeless, just because at this point, these are the wealthiest, most omniscient, omnipotent companies in the history of the universe who have a lot of power and control when it comes to lobbying for bills. So I think if there is a change, it's going to not be one that puts all that much more control in the hands of victims. As a lawyer, I believe that if somebody's been harmed, that our courts are there to equalize things, and that the wrongdoer needs to be, that's
accountability.
That's the whole. I don't need to be lecturing you about tort law. Obviously, Rick, you're a complete expert on it. But I mean, I really believe in our courts being that mechanism for victims to get their payback. Right. And in cases like Matthew, where payback isn't even the goal, they just want their safety, and they need intervention. The crisis is happening. It's not like okay, Matthew's crisis was over and now he's suing because of the harm, and wants compensation. It was ongoing.
That leads to a question. Was there ever any discussion with Grindr or their counsel to say, look, instead of making a big case out of this, why don't you, just as a matter of human decency, just ban this guy so that Matthew's life gets put back in place? Why can't we just quietly work that out? They didn't want to do that? Why?
They said they didn't have to. And I think they didn't want to be bullied into it. Here we are, just, like a small fry lawyer and a waiter and like, how dare we make this public demand of them? And I'll tell you that, like, initially we did not jump to litigation. I first was sending letters trying to get a hold of their general counsel, and they didn't respond. I mean, it's again just like the lack of mechanism for victims who are in current crisis, to get a hold of anybody. Like right now, I have a client who's a business, and a disgruntled employee took over their Facebook account. I've been dealing with Facebook people for 2 weeks, and they keep, wanting more and more stuff to prove, this or that, and to show that there's actually a harm, and this person's really like not authorized. It's like, dude, this is like a business asset. Like,
Right.
Why is it so hard to get you to just manage your platform responsibly? You have all the resources in the universe, and you just don't care about the users.
Interesting. Well, so let's segue. We're going to be trying to set up a program. You and I discussed this before we went on the air today, a program on Section 230. So for all of you listeners out there, stay tuned for that, because we're going to set up some sort of program on the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, with Carrie and some others, talking about the larger policy aspects of this. Before we finish, let me just mention that Carrie is not only an attorney, but she's an author and wrote a book called Nobody's Victim: Fighting Psychos, Stalkers, Pervs, and Trolls. Tell us about the book.
The book is basically, it's part storytelling. Each chapter kind of follows one of our cases, and then through the lens of a client's story, we insert a little education. So we talk about Matthew's case against Grindr, and then that leads to a discussion about what Section 230 is. Section 230 is a thread that continues throughout the book, because it truly is, when it comes to internet crimes, something that holds all of our cases back in one way or another from the client getting full justice. But also we talk about, we represented some of the initial accusers of Harvey Weinstein. We talk about the process of getting that arrest to happen, the history of non-consensual pornography, which, is a history that's about 8 years old, when we're talking about the recent wave of reform. But it really is a wake-up call for a lot of readers, they tell me, when it comes to like just the reality of like how anybody is just a moment away from having their life completely overturned by somebody who's hell-bent on their destruction.
Right. All right. So listen, this has been attorney Carrie Goldberg, author of Nobody's Victim, and it's a book well worth reading. Carrie, thank you very much for talking with us today. And of course, we'll see you again when we get this program off the ground. And so It has been a pleasure. Now, for those of you who have been watching this video, if you like this, please like it and subscribe to our series. We're going to have more videos of educational information like this. Do yourself a favor and pay attention to this stuff, because the law affects all of us. Anyway, thank you very much. See you soon.